Hello, students, and welcome once again to Introduction to Sociology, when we are talking about culture and media. I still can't get this PowerPoint to work the way I wanted to, so we're going to do it in a different way. Um, yeah, maybe some of you have done the activity already. Um, Maybe not. So, or the activity that has to do with the when we're looking at suicide rates by age group. So, if you haven't, do that now before you get into culture and media. I want you to do that part first before this lecture. So, anyway, culture and media. Okay, so um, culture, we hear this word a lot. Okay, we do hear this word a lot, and so what is culture? Culture is many things. Okay, so um, one moment, I'm gonna open this up. I'm gonna read it from my other computer here. So, so let's give you a little preview from the slide, okay, of what culture is. Culture, well, this is the textbook definitions here. As they say, textbook definitions. A set of beliefs, traditions, and practices. Um, the sum total of social categories and concepts we embrace in addition to beliefs, behaviors, accepting instinctual ones, and practices. And those not that which is not in the natural environment around us. Okay, so I want to say something about let's say something about the instinctual ones. There is a debate in sociology about whether human beings have instinct. And many sociologists, and I tend to agree with this, that there's no such thing as human instinct. We have drives, we have tendencies, and nature does shape some things, but all of it can be impacted by culture. Okay, so beliefs, traditions, practices, can be impacted by culture, and I'll get to that um, here. Actually, these are some characteristics of culture. This is from my old textbook by Anderson and Taylor. First of all, culture is learned. Culture is learned so well that it seems natural. Okay. Uh, for example, if I fed you certain foods, many of you would become physically ill. For example, if I fed you snails, if I fed you um, insects, if I fed you dog meat, if I fed you goat testicles or sheep intestines, okay, these are all foods in particular cultures, okay, in some cultures. There's no biological reason for you to get ill if you consumed this stuff, these foods, okay? Yet, many of you will. That's how well you learn culture, is that you have physical reactions to eating foods that are taboo, or that are wrong, that are considered too dirty or too clean or too sacred or too profane, that kind of thing. So, culture is learned, and that's how well we learn it, okay? Culture is shared. You cannot be a culture of one. This does not mean that everyone shares everything, but certain beliefs and ways of life are held in common. In fact, culture has to be shared. Culture has to be, we have to have a common definition of the situation in order to get by. See symbolic interactionism again. Okay, so culture is shared, and we arrive at the similar definitions of the situation through culture. Okay, um, let's see. Culture is taken for granted. Okay. Cultural practices seem, quote, normal. But if they stopped or changed, you would think that something is wrong. Okay, you just take for granted that everybody has the same, culture as you. We take it for granted in our everyday lives. We take it for granted that people speak the same language. You take it for granted that people have share the same kind of thing. But then when we're put in this different situation, we are often we're often thrown by different cultural practices. Uh, those of you who have spent time in a culture not of your upbringing probably made some mistakes, probably violated some social norms. Myself, my favorite example is eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in Germany. Um, and these Austrian tourists just thought that it was disgusting. One of them was brave enough to try it, but there's, but yeah, I was just taking for granted that everybody eats peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because it's the staple food of every American boy and girl, and I thought it was the staple food of every boy and girl in the world. Well, no. Okay. So, culture is symbolic. Symbols are very important. Very important. Okay. Symbols do not, okay. Things do not have inherent meaning. People bestow meanings onto things. For example, the American flag. Um, as we're approaching the 4th of July holiday and there are these symbols of patriotism, there's no reason why the flag or the Star Spangled Banner or the Pledge of Allegiance or any of these things in and of themselves are patriotic. They are symbols, and we bestow the meaning onto it. Okay. Culture varies across space and time. Okay. This is very important because culture functions as an adaptation to the environment. If you look around most of California, you don't see a lot of brick buildings, and that's because of earthquakes. Okay, in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, the first thing to fall was the brick chimneys. Okay, bricks don't hold up well, so there are now adaptations, so where we don't build out of brick. If you go traveling though, you might see a whole bunch of brick. Okay, so it's so it varies across space and time. I got this out of this example out of the Anderson and Taylor textbook that I used to have. Is that in Tibet they don't bury the dead; they leave their dead out to basically for the vultures. Okay, why is that? The ground is too frozen. Okay, to dig. So so it's a good time to remember things like cultural relativity. Okay, that's suspending judgment about a cultural practice that until things can be understood in terms of its own culture. Okay, doesn't mean anything goes, but it does mean suspending judgment. Um, that's to fight something called ethnocentrism, the belief that your culture is superior. Okay. Um, Basically, everybody's ethnocentric. Everybody's ethnocentric. So it's a matter of suspending judgment, looking at your own cultural biases, and trying to understand how things, um, trying to understand how a cultural practice makes sense given that environment, given the place that the people live. Okay. So, for example, food. Sometimes people eat what they have access to. If it's edible they have access to, there it is. Okay. So, adaptation to the environment. What else about culture? There's another thing about culture is that Ann Swidler says the culture is a toolkit. Basically, that there are certain practices, beliefs, practices, and traditions and things, and we have this kind of cultural toolbox, okay, that we take out whenever whenever we need it. Okay, the culture is it's a toolkit. It's how do we adapt to the world? How do we like adapt to new situations? Well, those of you who have been in cultures other than your own, you probably reached into your cultural toolkit in order to try to adapt to a certain extent. Okay, if you were, say, in a situation of, say, food, say, eating. Okay, um, you probably, you probably got by, with observation and things. Okay, what is everybody else doing? Okay, or trying to communicate using gestures with somebody who doesn't speak your language. So certain gestures you may use is part of your cultural toolkit. That's probably a better example than food. Okay, so let's see. Elements of culture. Okay, we've got language, a set of symbols and rules that put together in a meaningful way provide a complex system of communication. Language, very important. People are language goes very deep with people. Okay, there are certain things in life that go very deep, and language is one of them. Okay, beliefs are shared ideas about what is true held collectively by people within a given culture. Okay, so you might think about this in terms of what what we believe in American society. Our values are particular kinds of beliefs. Those are our moral beliefs. Values are what is good and right and desirable, or bad, wrong, or undesirable. Okay, those are values. Okay, our moral beliefs. We have other beliefs in American society about, say, um, individualism, capitalism, democracy, meritocracy, things like that. Okay. Those are like big beliefs that we have in American society, some of which I'll address later in the class. Norms are tell us our how values tell us to behave, our norms. Okay, and this is different than um, what you will find out there in the world. Mores are strict norms that control moral and ethical behavior. They're often written down. There's often a consequence uh, for disobeying them, so they're strict. Okay, Uh, you see, out there in the world, a lot of times people use mores like folkways, general standards of behavior. That is wrong sociologically. Mores are strict norms. Okay. Um, Folkways are general standards of behavior adhered to by a group. Okay. So at a baseball game, you must wear clothing. Now, you might be familiar with the practice. Sometimes people go streaking across the baseball field. They will get arrested and all that. There will be charges. Those are violation of mores. Okay, so you have to wear clothes. But what clothes to wear? Well, those are folkways. Okay. You won't get arrested for wearing orange and black at an A's game. By the way, I'm an Oakland A's fan. Go A's. But people will like give you funny looks. Okay, so and they'll like they'll give you funny looks and they'll like and things like that, and they might heckle you a little bit, but you won't get arrested for it. Okay, so that's some things on culture. Usually in class, this takes like longer because I'm doing some activities. Like I pass around a piece of the Berlin Wall to explain how culture is symbolic, but I can't really do it here. So let's move on to competing theories of the media. Okay, of the mainstream media. So we'll talk about media a little bit here. There's some stuff in your book. Here's some competing theories of the mass media. The first one is the reflection hypothesis. This is the idea that the mass media just reflects the values of the population. Okay, there's some truth in this. Okay, if there's something that doesn't reflect the values of the population, it just won't catch on. Thing is, you can always find like a market for something. For example, what was that one? There was a video game a few years ago that was very controversial, yet it found a market. What's it called? Grand Theft Auto. Yeah, and some of that stuff was just really wild. Okay, would it reflect the values of the general population? Well, maybe it depends upon the general population, but it did find a market. But there are some things that you would probably, just would not reflect the values of the population. That's the reflection hypothesis. Cultivation theory says that the media forms a more or less consistent worldview within people. So it doesn't just reflect the values of the population. It actually forms people's worldview. Okay. One of the best examples of this is crime. Um, Back in the 1990s, an interesting thing happened. Violent crime rates went down. We're talking the street crimes. Okay. Um, Murder, robbery, burglary, etc. Street crimes. Street crime rates went down, but people's perception of crime went up. Okay. And people thought that there was more crime than what there was. And one of the reasons why is because of the media. The emergence of shows such as Cops and America's Most Wanted. Reality crime shows played a huge role in this. People who consume more media, especially crime shows and especially reality crime shows, think that there is more crime than there is, and think that there's more crime than people who do not. Okay, watch this stuff. So that's an example of cultivation theory. And this cultivates something that's called the mean world syndrome, where people think that there's just crime everywhere. Okay. Um, Social action theory states that media audiences are active participants in constructing the meaning of media messages. Okay, so it is. It's not just about. It's not just about the. Sorry, I got to get to my page here. So yeah, we are. We actively engage in this. Okay, we're not just passive viewers, but we interpret the meanings of messages. So those who work in social action theory are interested in one, the producer's intention, two, the actual content, and three, the audience interpretation. And here's an example. There used to be a sitcom way back in the 1960s, 1970s called All in the Family. You could look this up on YouTube and stuff, and if you wanted. And there, much of the show were arguments between a guy named Archie Bunker, who is the patriarch of the family, the head of the man of the family here, and his son-in-law, who was, I believe, a graduate student in sociology, and I think it was at NYU. It's the only sociologist ever on TV, as far as I know. Okay, so now the producers meant to portray Archie Bunker as kind of a buffoon, someone who's racist and sexist and, not to be taken seriously. They didn't, not for someone to have sympathy for. But people who watched the show loved Archie Bunker and they really identified with what he was saying. Okay, so so here's like, an example of social action theory where media audiences were like actively constructing the messages here. Okay, so that's social action theory. One of my favorite theories is agenda setting. It tells you basically the media doesn't tell you what to think, it tells you what to think about. Okay. Um, it basically sets the agenda for your thoughts. Okay. For example, I often ask people, and you can think of this a little bit, pause it if you want. 2016, who ran for president? Well, you're probably coming up with names such as Donald Trump, um, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, maybe Ted Cruz. Maybe I came up with Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, these people, okay? However, how many of you came up with, say, Gary Johnson or Jill Stein? Gary Johnson, if you haven't heard of him, is with the Libertarian Party, and Jill Stein, if you haven't heard of her, is with the Green Party. You see, we frame our presidential elections as Republican versus Democrat, but there are other political parties out there. So when we think about presidential elections, we are told to think about Republicans and Democrats, okay? And it's framed that way, okay? Framing calls into attention some aspects of reality while obscuring other elements, which might lead audiences to different reactions. That's from some authors named McCombs and Shaw. Okay, so they, the idea that there's other political parties is not portrayed in the media, so we don't think about it. Okay, I'll get more to framing later. Okay, in the course, priming is McCombs and Shaw say a psychological process whereby media emphasis on particular issues not only increases the salience or importance of those issues, but also activates in people's memories previously acquired information about those issues. Okay, so if there is, say, a terrorist attack today, you are already primed to think about it in a particular way. Okay, because you'll go back to past media coverages of terrorist attacks, okay, and things like that. Okay, so agenda setting. That's among my favorite theories in terms of mass media. And then finally, media dependency theory, how people depend on the media to get their individual needs met. It links the individual, media, and larger social system. Okay. For example, natural disasters. Okay, if there was some kind of natural disaster, we would be depending upon the media in order to get our needs met. Finding out what stores are open, if the water is safe to drink, or how to get to and from certain places we need to get to. Okay, so there's that. Okay, so what I want you to do is for your in-class activity is to go to Canopy and watch Killing Us Softly. This is Gene Kilbourne's video on the representation of women in advertising. And so then I want you to do this. Pay attention to her categories here. These are her categories. I also have this listed in the module for this time. So, but these are her categories that she came up with. Pay attention to these. Then go to the internet and find an image and tell me what category it's in and why. Also, as you watch the video and do this activity, what theory of the mass media do you think is most pertinent and why? Or like what applies the most and why? Okay, so do that and write it up and put it in assignments. Okay, it's been great chatting, and I will talk to you later. Okay, bye.